Welcome back to this review slash retrospective for the game Sonic 3 and Knuckles. I'm just going to fire it up here in my Genesis Classics collection real quick. And then while it plays the demo reel in the background, I'll just go ahead and give you my thoughts on the game. And yeah, I'm just going to jump right on into it. So basically, let me go ahead and start by saying that this is a good game. It's a really good game. But when I first started playing it, I kept thinking to myself how much I liked Sonic 2 better. And that's kind of a, the more I played the game, I realized how much better it was actually from a technical perspective, and then actually from a gameplay perspective as well. So let me clarify what I mean by that. So basically, I would say this game, the opening stages are kind of what's the word I'm looking for here? Misleading, because they're not the best stages in the game. Very early on, you hit Marble Garden Zone and Carnival Night Zone, and those two zones alone are kind of off-putting, very much so, especially Carnival Night Zone. It had that barrel that I couldn't even figure out how to basically, get it, figure out how to get the barrel to actually get me past to the next point of the game, and I had to actually look it up in a guide. So from that perspective, it was something I really wasn't a big fan of, to say the least. But, once you got past that, you got to the ice cap zone, and then things started progressing forward, and you got into the Sonic and Knuckles portion of the game, then things were actually quite a bit better. So it's kind of weird that some of the early levels they started with kind of left a bit of a bad impression on me initially. So yeah, it's like first impressions are the most important, and their first impressions were not the best, to say the least. But the more I thought about it, I started comparing this to a lot of the other Sonic games I've played, and it's actually, there's a lot to like about this game, to say the least. There's a lot more depth to it than pretty much any of the Sonic games that came before it, which you kind of expect that, to be completely honest with you. I felt like the levels themselves were much more expansive than anything that had come previously, even more expansive than a lot of the Sonic CD levels. So from that perspective, there's just a lot going on. Much like Sonic 2, I believe there's a lot of variety. The majority of the stages were divided into 2 acts for each zone, and so that pretty much stayed the same throughout almost the entire game until roughly the very end of it, per se. So a lot of variety. Trying to think from an actual number perspective, was it more than Sonic 2? I'm not sure. Not sure about that, but it was very close to at least being equal to Sonic 2 with the variety of stages and enemies and things of that nature that you came across. The soundtrack, well, the one thing you definitely say about all of the Sonic games up to this point, and maybe even moving forward as well, all the 16-bit Sonic games have had very good soundtracks, every single one of them. I still think the Sega CD one has the best soundtrack, which kind of goes without saying. You kind of expect that for something that has CD quality audio. But at the end of the day, the soundtrack for this is also very good, very impressive. Much like all the stages, a lot of different variety. I don't think it quite hits the high of Sonic 2, Chemical Plant Zone. That's just my own personal preference. But there were a lot of good stage themes as well in here. I think probably once Ice Cap Zone, once we got there, that's when you're like, okay, this is some pretty good music. I think Ice Cap Zone is probably a very iconic theme as well, but I wouldn't put it in the same tier as, say, um, Chemical Plant Zone. But overall, one thing you can't really fault this game for is the soundtrack. The soundtrack consistently is one of the things that is always good so far, at least in my opinion, with the Sonic games. And so, very good. Uh, Another thing that is kind of consistent, since this is on the screen, is how much I don't like the special stages. And honestly, this is kind of where I started to get a little bit conflicted here, because initially I thought I felt that the way they did the discovery of the special stages in Sonic 2 was better, and to a certain extent I still believe that. The getting 50 rings, when you get to a star post, you could go into a special stage. To a certain extent, that was actually a lot easier than what you saw here. But here, basically, the special stages encouraged exploration more. So there's a very interesting mix of, say, old Sonic, like Sonic and Sonic CD, and Sonic 2. So there's a very interesting mix there from a play style perspective. But like I said, I was leaning towards preferring the way Sonic 2 did it. But with this game having a battery backup save file, basically, it does allow you to, I mean, if you really wanted to get down to it, you could replay the stages over and over again. Like, don't complete them completely, and then you could get the Chaos Emeralds that way, I suppose. But better than that, and this is definitely a feather in the cap for this game, and the highlight of all the special stages is the fact that this game allows you to go back and play levels that you've already completed after you've beaten the game. So from a special stage perspective, this game probably has the best method of accessing them, because you can go back and get them after the fact, and then you can access the supersonic and even hypersonic forms in the game. The only problem with that is, if you do it like that, and the way I did it, then basically you've already completed the game. And so, since you've already completed the game, you don't really get the true benefit of having those forms in the game as you're playing it. So, kind of stinks a little bit, but also, I don't know, it does at least keep you from having to rely on, say, save states, or in the case if you had original hardware, just pulling out your hair if you weren't very good at the special stages. And I was not. That's one thing that's been consistent for me across all these 4 games so far, is I'm not good at these special stages. I don't know. I don't think this is the worst special stage in the game, but I don't like Blue Spheres. I think, actually, if I were to rank the 4 games that I've played so far, I'd probably have to give the edge to Sonic CD. I think the special stages in Sonic CD were actually better than the ones that here. And furthermore, I want to also further point out the fact that there's twice as many of them as well, because it's not just the Chaos Emeralds. Then you've got to get the Super Emeralds as well if you want the truly best form in the game. And some could say even the best ending to the game. So it's twice as many stages, and one of them, the light blue Super Emerald, that one was so bad that I actually had to get a guide online and look at a map just to have a chance of figuring it out. I don't know, that one just really stuck to me. So it's really close in my mind. I just wasn't a big fan of this of Blue Spheres. I just wasn't. I mean, some people may like it. I just wasn't a big fan. But like I said, I do like the fact that they allowed you to go back and replay that stuff without having to replay the entire game again to try and experience those forms. So that's a really good, uh, you know, thought process that they had for this game. I mean, as far as graphics and control, I can definitely just say that the graphics has just been consistently good for all the games, but it's probably the best of them all right here. This one, I don't know. I mean, again, I think if you compare it to Sonic CD, it's a very close tie. I think Sonic CD looked very good. I thought Sonic 2 looked very good. So all the games from a graphical perspective have been very good. I think the control in this game, probably the best control out of all of them so far, in my opinion. Yet I think and I would also say that the control is very good. Sonic controls very well, and unlike Sonic 2, Tails and Knuckles play completely differently. Now I have started playing this again on my own with Tails, and I can say, in my opinion, Tails is mostly the easy mode of the game. Very honestly, yeah, he just like his ability to fly that wasn't really there in Sonic 2, and I played Sonic 2 with Tails alone. So in Tails alone, he was basically just a clone of Sonic for all intents and purposes, whereas he actually does control completely differently and a very different play style. And for the most part, I would say so far with playing with Tails it's definitely easier than playing with Sonic, with the exception of the bosses. So far I've gone through like the first 3 zones with Tails, and I had to figure out how to beat Robotnik, especially the one there in Marble Garden Zone. I'm like, well, how am I supposed to hit him? We're flying, and I can't spin jump at him like I could with Sonic. And so that took a little bit of, I had to go online and figure out, like, what am I supposed to do here? And you're supposed to use your tail to hit him. Who knew? So anyway, from that perspective, that's one thing about this game that I'm not a big fan of, is that there are these little gotcha moments where it's not very obvious how you're supposed to get by. You know, Tails with beating certain bosses, the Carnival Night Zone, that stupid barrel. There's just these certain little gotcha moments here that I think that I could have done without. You know, they left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. But overall, I would say that from a depth perspective, technical perspective, all that aside, this game definitely is the best of all 4 that I've played. And the more I've played the game, the more it has grown on me. So I definitely think it is the best, and there's just a lot more depth to it. So it's got a lot of that going for it. So yeah, it's the best of the original 4 Sonic games, platformer games, not counting stuff like Sonic Spinball and whatnot, which, well, who knows how good that game will be if I really do try to get into it on my own time. But basically, this is a very good game. The only thing I think it sours on is the initial impressions leave a bit of a sour taste in your mouth, and then as you get going, you realize, okay, this game's not so bad, and it grows on you, and you realize it is a very good, it's a good game. Now, the game itself, I don't know, like back in the day, it was probably kind of expensive because they had to package it. You had to buy it twice. You had to buy Sonic 3, and then you had to buy Sonic and Knuckles, and then do that whole lock-on technology. And at the end of the day, they're like, oh, it's revolutionary. And if you think about it from back in the day, it's not really all that revolutionary. You can only use it with the lock-on cartridge I said. You can only use it with Sonic 2, and Sonic 3. And then really if you're using it with Sonic, it's not really all that great. It's just, do you want 5,000 levels of blue spheres? Here you go. Doesn't sound very appealing to me. But anyway, that aside, the game itself, this particular game, Sonic 3 and Knuckles, is a little more hard to come by compared to Sonic 1 and Sonic 2. Now, obviously, they do have it in the Sonic Origins collection, which just came out fairly recently. So you can play the updated version with, widescreen resolution and all the other stuff. But from what a lot of people have said, they have changed the soundtrack. I don't know that for a fact, but the game itself is available in Sonic Origins, which is pretty much on every platform that there is. But like this particular game, and the fact that I played it originally on Steam, it's not available on Steam any longer. So you'd have to get the Genesis Classics Collection on, say, a console, basically like the Switch, the Xbox, or PlayStation, if you want to play this specific version of the game. So a little bit more difficult to come by, but not super difficult. I mean, you do have the version that's available on Sonic Origins, and it is available in certain areas, but I guess keep that caveat in mind if you're looking for this particular version of the game. Now, one thing I would like to talk about very quickly when it comes to Sonic games, and me personally with how I'm planning to play these games moving forward, is I've thought a lot about the chronology of Sonic. And one of the things about this game, or the whole series that made me want to actually start playing it, is the fact that there's basically two timelines. Mostly, you've got the modern Sonic timeline, and then you've got the classic Sonic timeline. And the more I thought about that, and just even recently thinking about it, it seems a bit of a oxymoron calling them that, because classic Sonic and modern Sonic both share the same origin, as in these first four games: Sonic 1, 2, 3 and Knuckles, and Sonic CD. All four of those games are basically the same amongst it. And the more I thought about it logically, it would be kind of weird to play these four games and then jump to the second portion of the classic Sonic timeline with Sonic Mania. Because if you think about it logically, all the modern Sonic games have to happen first before you get to Sonic Generations, and then that split actually happens because of modern Sonic meeting classic Sonic. So, just a little bit of gee whiz information. Moving forward, I've decided I'm going to actually stick with the modern Sonic timeline initially, and then I will get to the classic Sonic timeline probably after I play Sonic Generations. So it's going to take me a little bit to get there. I just wanted to mention it real quick because I just thought about it. It's like, if you think about it logically, it's just one of those things that it doesn't make a lot of sense to play the rest of the classic Sonic games until after you play Sonic Generations. And that's just me personally. In fact, I don't even like that name, Classic Sonic. Maybe it should be something like Neo Classic, because that whole timeline doesn't happen until after modern Sonic has gone through everything. So who's really the modern Sonic? The modern Sonic is really more classic Sonic, if we're being completely honest here. Just a little bit of gee whiz food for thought for me, basically. But anyway, I digress. This game is a very good game, and I think if I were to look at all four of the main original games, I would probably keep most of my rankings the same. If anything, I would probably increase my ranking for Sonic the Hedgehog, the original one, to maybe 85%. Maybe I ranked it a little bit too low at 80%. So I'd probably say maybe 85% for that one. Keep Sonic CD and Sonic 2 at 90%. Again, I want to point out that the Sonic CD version that I played was a little more up to date. And so maybe I would have had a little more of a negative opinion of Sonic CD, because I heard the original version was a little more janky, for lack of a better word. But the version that I played that came out in 2012, that was available on Steam before they removed it, that one played pretty well, in my opinion. So I think Sonic 2 and Sonic CD I both give a 90%. But I think for this one, I think it did earn a 95%, in my opinion. And I think a lot of the things that I would ding it for is those initial impressions and some, things that just aren't very well understood in the game and not explained, because I had no idea how to get past them, and I have to go look on the internet to kind of get some sort of idea just how to get past a certain obstacle, because it was a little bit obtuse would be the best word to describe it. To a certain extent, you know, the exploration is cool, but also not as intuitive as well. So again, I had to look up a guide for some of the giant ring locations. So I wouldn't say it's guide heavy, but there are aspects to the game that a guide definitely helps to enhance your enjoyment of the game. So definitely from that perspective, I think you do have to, you know, subtract a little bit of points from the game. But overall, I think this is a good, well, it's not technically a swan song for the Genesis games, Sonic games, but kind of sort of is before it does start moving into the modern Sonic time period. But anyway, that's my thoughts on the game. It's definitely a good game. If you never played it, you're one of the very few people in the world, like myself, who never got around to playing this. It's definitely worth your time to get a copy of Sonic 3 however you can and give it a try. Highly recommended, and it's definitely a good time for sure. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the game, and thank you very much for watching this video. I'll see y'all in the next one. Take care.